The wedding dress lay crumpled in the middle of Oak Street, white satin smeared with mud and what looked like lipstick. I stood there in the rain, watching the red and blue lights paint everything in stuttering color. Guests huddled under the chapel awning, some crying, others just staring at nothing. The groom, Jason Parker, sat on the curb with his head in his hands, phone pressed to his ear like he was still trying to call her back into existence. I'm Detective Mara Ellison. I've worked missing persons for 8 years, and I've learned to read a scene before anyone speaks. This one felt wrong from the start. Not because a bride had vanished, though that was strange enough. It was the silence between her family members that got me. Her father, Charles Vance, stood apart from everyone else, arms crossed, face empty. Her brother, Tom, paced near the chapel steps, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The maid of honor, a young woman named Kayla, grabbed my arm as I walked past. Her mascara had run in black streaks down her face. She said someone was watching her, Kayla whispered. Last week, she said she felt eyes on her everywhere she went. I looked back at the dress. One shoe lay nearby. The other was missing. Whatever happened to Emily Vance didn't happen by accident. To understand that night, I had to go back 2 weeks. That's when Emily first walked into the sheriff's office, asking to speak with someone about her mother's death. The deputy at the desk told her the case was closed, had been for 17 years. Emily insisted it wasn't an accident. She had questions no one wanted to answer. The deputy sent her away. Now I stood in Emily's apartment, searching for anything that might explain where she'd gone. The place was neat, organized, almost obsessively so. A corkboard hung above her desk, covered in wedding plans, venue photos, and sticky notes. One note caught my eye. New life starts June 14th. Finally free. Free from what? Jason stood in the doorway, watching me. She was different the last few weeks, he said quietly. Nervous. Kept checking the locks. She'd wake up at night and just stare out the window. Did she tell you why? He shook his head. She said she found something in her dad's house. Something about her mom. But every time I asked, she'd change the subject. I pulled down the corkboard. Beneath the wedding plans was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local woman dies in tragic fall." The photo showed a younger Charles Vance standing outside this same chapel, face blank with shock. Emily's mother had died 17 years ago, right before her own wedding. I drove to the Vance house the next morning. It sat at the end of Maple Drive, a 2-story colonial with peeling paint and overgrown hedges. Charles answered the door in yesterday's clothes, eyes red-rimmed but dry. Grief comes in different forms. This looked like stone. Mr. Vance, I need to ask you about Emily's state of mind before the wedding. He stepped aside, let me in. The house smelled like mildew and something older, something that had been sealed away too long. Family photos lined the hallway, but I noticed gaps on the wall where frames had been removed. Dust outlines showed where they used to hang. Emily was happy, Charles said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. She loved Jason. She was excited about the wedding. Did she talk to you about her mother recently? His jaw tightened. Just for a second, but I saw it. No. Why would she? I pulled out my notebook. Because 2 weeks ago, she went to the sheriff's office asking questions about how her mother died. She seemed to think it wasn't an accident. Charles sat down heavily in an armchair. My daughter was stressed. Wedding planning, work, all of it. Sometimes people create problems when they're anxious. What kind of problems? He didn't answer. Behind him, a door stood slightly ajar. I could see stairs leading down into darkness. A basement. Mr. Vance, did Emily go into your basement recently? His hand gripped the armrest. No one goes down there. It's been sealed since my wife passed. But his eyes said something different. They said, she went down there, and now everything is falling apart. Kayla met me at a coffee shop downtown. She clutched her cup with both hands, steam rising between us. Emily called me 3 nights before the wedding, she said. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. She was crying. What did she say? She said she found her mother's diary, hidden in the basement of her dad's house. She went there to pick up some old photos for the wedding slideshow, and she found this locked box behind the water heater. I leaned forward. What was in the diary? Kayla's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Her mom wrote about being afraid, about arguments with Charles. about wanting to leave him but being too scared. The last entry was dated the day before she died. It said, "He knows I'm going to tell. God help me, he knows." The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too bright. Did Emily tell her father she found it? She confronted him the morning of the rehearsal. She asked him what really happened to her mom. He told her she was being dramatic, that grief makes people imagine things. But Emily didn't believe him. "Where's the diary now?" Kayla's hands trembled. "That's the thing, Detective. Emily hid it somewhere safe," she said. "Somewhere no one would think to look. But she never told me where. And now she's gone." I asked Kayla one more question before I left. Did Emily ever mention feeling like someone was following her? She nodded, tears starting fresh. Every single day that last week. She said she'd see the same car parked outside her apartment. A dark sedan. No plates she could read. The wedding rehearsal had taken place 2 nights before Emily vanished. I tracked down the church organist, an older woman named Mrs. Chun, who'd been practicing that evening. She remembered the tension. The father and son had words, she told me, fingers still moving absently over invisible keys. Right there in the sanctuary. I tried not to listen, but their voices carried. What were they arguing about? The boy, Tom, kept saying, "You can't keep doing this." The father told him to be quiet, that it was family business. Tom said something about Emily deserving to know the truth. Then Charles grabbed his arm and pulled him outside. I thanked her and sat alone in the empty chapel. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, painting the pews in blues and reds. This was supposed to be a place of joy, of new beginnings. Instead, it felt like a crime scene waiting to reveal itself. My phone buzzed. The forensics team had finished processing Emily's car, found abandoned behind the chapel. They discovered something under the driver's seat. A small digital recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. I drove straight to the station. The tech handed me the device with gloves on. "There's one recording," he said, dated the day before she disappeared. I pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room, shaky but determined. "My name is Emily Vance. If you're listening to this, something has happened to me. I found the truth about my mother. It's in the basement, behind the second door. If I don't come back, please make them open it. Make them show everyone what they've been hiding." The recording ended with the sound of a door closing and Emily's footsteps fading away. I requested a warrant to search the Vance basement. The judge, an old friend of Charles from their high school days, denied it. "Insufficient evidence," he said. A recording wasn't enough without corroboration. I knew what that meant. In a small town like Ashgrove, old connections run deep as roots. But I wasn't about to let it go. I started digging into the official report from 17 years ago, when Emily's mother, Caroline Vance, died. The incident occurred at the chapel, according to the file. She'd fallen down the basement stairs during final wedding preparations. Broken neck, instantaneous death. Except the coroner's report didn't match the scene photos. The stairs showed no signs of blood despite the severity of the injury. And Caroline's body had bruising inconsistent with a fall, bruising that suggested she'd been grabbed, held. The investigating officer was Sheriff Marcus Donnelly, now retired. I found him at the Ashgrove Country Club, playing cards with 3 other men. One of them was Charles Vance. They looked up when I approached, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. "Detective Ellison," Donnelly said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here. I'm investigating Emily Vance's disappearance. I have questions about her mother's death." Charles stood abruptly. "This is harassment. It's an investigation, Mr. Vance. Your daughter is missing, and the last thing she was looking into was how her mother died. I think that's worth exploring." Donnelly set down his cards carefully. Caroline Vance's death was ruled accidental. The case is closed. Has been for 17 years. Closed cases can be reopened if new evidence emerges. "What new evidence?" His voice was still calm, but I saw his fingers tighten on the table edge. "That's what I intend to find out." Tom Vance found me 2 days later at a diner on Route 9. He slid into the booth across from me, looking like he hadn't slept since the wedding. His hands shook as he reached for the coffee. I pushed toward him. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said quietly. "Then help me ask the right ones." He stared into the coffee cup like it held answers. "Emily found something. In the basement. Something Dad never wanted anyone to see. The diary? Not just that. He looked up, eyes hollow. There's a room down there, behind a cement wall. Dad had it sealed up when I was 6 years old, right after Mom died. My pulse quickened. What's in the room, Tom? I don't know. I was too young to understand what was happening. But I remember Dad and Sheriff Donnelly working late one night, mixing cement, carrying something heavy downstairs. Dad told me never to talk about it. He said if I did, bad things would happen to our family. Tom, this is important. Did Emily tell your father she was going to expose whatever's down there? He nodded, tears finally breaking free. The morning of the rehearsal, she told him she'd been inside the basement, that she'd found Mom's diary, and that she knew he was lying about what happened. Dad told her she didn't understand, that she was going to ruin everything. She said she didn't care. She said Mom deserved justice. What did your father say to that? Tom's voice cracked. He said, your mother got exactly what she deserved. I went back to the judge with Tom's statement. This time, he couldn't refuse. The warrant was issued, and I assembled a team to excavate the Vance basement. Charles tried to block us at the door, but I had 2 officers escort him to the station for questioning. The basement stairs creaked under our weight. Damp air rose to meet us, thick with the smell of earth and decay. I swept my flashlight across the space. Old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, a rusted water heater. Nothing unusual, until we found the door. It was hidden behind a metal shelving unit we had to move. The door itself was old wood, but the frame around it had been sealed with cement, gray, and cracking with age. Someone had wanted to make sure whatever was behind it stayed there. Get the jackhammers, I told my team. It took 2 hours to break through. The cement was thick, professionally done. When the last chunk fell away and we pulled the door open, stale air rushed out like a held breath finally released. Inside was a small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet. No windows, no ventilation. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling, and when I pulled the chain, weak yellow light revealed what had been hidden for 17 years. A wedding veil, yellowed and torn, lay across a wooden chair. Photographs covered one wall, pictures of Caroline Vance, some with her face scratched out. And in the corner, beneath a pile of old blankets, we found the floorboards. Dark stains had seeped into the wood, stains that had never been cleaned. My forensics tech knelt beside them, running a presumptive test. When she looked up at me, her face was pale. It's blood, she said. A lot of it. Charles Vance sat across from me in the interrogation room, lawyer at his side. But lawyers can't erase evidence, and we had plenty now. DNA from the floorboards matched Caroline Vance. The blood pattern suggested she'd been killed in that room, not at the chapel where her body was found. Mr. Vance, I began, keeping my voice level, we found your wife's blood in the sealed room in your basement. The room you had cemented shut 17 years ago. I need you to tell me what happened. His lawyer started to object, but Charles held up a hand. Something in him had broken. Maybe he was seeing his son's statement, or maybe he was just tired of carrying the weight. Caroline was going to leave me, he said quietly. She'd been having an affair with a man from the city. She was going to take Emily and Tom and disappear. I couldn't let that happen. So you killed her. We argued. In the basement. She said she'd been pretending to love me for years. That I disgusted her. That she'd rather die than spend another day as my wife. His voice was flat, empty. I didn't plan it. I put my hand around her throat, and I didn't let go until she stopped moving. The room went silent, except for the hum of the recorder. Sheriff Donnelly helped you cover it up? Charles nodded. Marcus owed me money. Gambling debts. I told him I'd forgive everything if he helped me. We moved her body to the chapel, staged the fall. He wrote the report. Everyone believed it. In the room, I couldn't clean the blood. It had soaked too deep. So we sealed it. I told Tom never to speak of it, and I thought it was over. He looked up at me finally, until Emily found Caroline's diary. Emily had confronted her father the morning of the wedding rehearsal. Tom's statement confirmed it. She'd told Charles she knew the truth, that she'd found the diary and seen the sealed room. She said she was going to the police. Charles had begged her to wait, to think about the family, about Tom's future. Emily refused. She said her mother deserved justice, even if it came 17 years late. That's when Charles made his decision. He couldn't let Emily destroy what he'd built. He couldn't let her tear apart the life he'd constructed on top of Caroline's grave. "What did you do to Emily?" I asked. Charles closed his eyes. "I told her we'd talk after the wedding, that I'd explain everything. She didn't trust me, but she agreed to wait one more day. And on the wedding day, she came to the house that morning. She wanted the diary back. I'd found it in her apartment and taken it. We argued again. She said she was going to tell Jason everything before the ceremony, that she couldn't start a marriage with this secret." His hands were shaking now. "I didn't plan it. You have to understand. I couldn't lose everything." I grabbed her, tried to make her listen. She fought back. She was screaming. I put my hand over her mouth, and she bit me hard. He held up his palm. I could still see the teeth marks scabbed over. I panicked. I grabbed her harder. She stopped struggling. When I let go, she just collapsed. The search dogs found Emily 2 days later. Charles had buried her in the woods behind the chapel, the same place where her mother was supposed to have died. The grave was shallow, hastily dug. He'd wrapped her in the tablecloth from the reception hall, white linen stained with dirt. We exhumed her body on a gray morning while rain turned the ground to mud. Jason stood at the police line, held back by officers, watching the woman he was supposed to marry being pulled from the earth. His grief was a physical thing, bending him in half. The coroner confirmed what Charles had admitted. Emily died from asphyxiation. She'd been strangled, just like her mother. The pattern repeated across generations. Same hands, same rage. But there was more to the story. Tom's statement revealed that Charles had called him the morning of the wedding, frantic. He told Tom what happened, said Emily was dead and that they had to protect the family name. Tom had helped him move the body, had driven the car to Oak Street, and scattered the dress to make it look like an abduction. At 19 years old, Tom Vance became an accessory to his sister's murder because his father told him family came first. Sheriff Donnelly was arrested the same day. 17 years of silence. 17 years of knowing he'd helped a murderer walk free. He'd done it for money, for the debt forgiveness, for the comfort of looking the other way. The town of Ash Grove learned what had been buried beneath their chapel, beneath their sheriff's office, beneath the perfect facade of a respected family. And they learned that silence has a cost. I attended Emily's funeral on a Tuesday. The chapel was packed with people who'd never suspected, who believed the lie, who'd thought the Vance family was tragedy-touched but innocent. Now they knew different. Jason read a letter Emily had written to him, one he'd found in her apartment. In it, she talked about starting fresh, about building a life free from the shadows of the past. She wrote about wanting children someday, about teaching them to be brave enough to tell the truth even when it hurts. She never got that chance. Tom sat in the front pew, broken and hollow. He'd made a deal with prosecutors, testifying against his father in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the guilt would stay with him forever. He'd helped bury his sister to protect a man who'd killed both the women who loved him. Caroline Vance's grave was beside Emily's now. Mother and daughter, reunited in death because one man couldn't stand the thought of either of them leaving. The headstones were simple, just names and dates. But someone had left flowers at both, fresh roses that stood bright against the gray stone. Charles Vance was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, life without parole. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and every day the courtroom was full of people who needed to see justice done, even if it came too late for Caroline and Emily. Sheriff Donnelly pleaded guilty to being an accessory and evidence tampering. 20 years. The town tried to move on, but some things don't heal. Some secrets, once exposed, leave scars that never fade. I stood in the empty chapel 6 months later. The building had been sold to a new congregation, people who didn't know its history. They'd repainted the walls, replaced the carpet, tried to wash away the stain of what happened there. But I could still see it. The ghost of a bride who never made it down the aisle. The mother who died trying to escape. The father who chose pride over love, silence over truth. Emily's case file sat on my desk back at the station, marked closed. But closure is a word we use when we don't have a better one. The dead don't get closure. They get graves and flowers and people who remember. I thought about the recording Emily made, her voice shaking but determined. She knew the risk. She knew her father was dangerous. But she chose truth anyway, because some things matter more than safety. The altar where Emily should have stood was empty now. Someone had left a single white rose there, petals beginning to brown at the edges. I didn't know who'd placed it, but I understood the gesture. Some people leave flowers for the dead. Others leave them for the truth that finally, painfully, came to light. I walked out of the chapel into gray afternoon light. Rain was starting again, soft and steady. Somewhere in Ash Grove, people were going about their lives, buying groceries, picking up kids from school, pretending that everything was normal. But it wasn't, and maybe it never would be again. The Vance house stood empty, windows dark. The bank had foreclosed after Charles's conviction, and no one wanted to buy it. Everyone knew what had happened in that basement. In that sealed room, where a woman bled out while her husband washed his hands upstairs. I've been inside one last time, making sure the evidence was cataloged properly. The house felt hollow, like something vital had been removed and nothing could fill the space. Family photos still hung in the hallway, smiling faces that now seemed like lies. In Emily's old bedroom, I found a box she'd packed for her honeymoon. Summer dresses, sandals, a new journal with blank pages. She'd written on the first page, "Our new beginning, June 14th. The date she was supposed to marry Jason. The date she was buried instead. I took the journal with me. It felt wrong to leave it there, wrong to let her words and hopes dissolve into dust with everything else. Jason had left Ash Grove 2 months after the funeral. He'd moved to Oregon, taken a job teaching high school English. He sent me a letter once, thanking me for finding Emily, for giving her family the truth she'd died trying to expose. He said he thought about her every day, wondered what their life could have been. I wrote back, but never heard from him again. Some grief is too heavy to carry in conversation. The chapel basement had been filled in, sealed permanently. The new congregation didn't want any reminder of what had happened there. But before they poured the concrete, I went down one last time. The room where we'd found the blood was empty now, evidence removed, walls bare. But standing there, I could feel the weight of it. 2 women had died because they wanted freedom. Caroline from a marriage that suffocated her. Emily from a family secret that poisoned everything it touched. I thought about Charles Vance sitting in his cell, 72 years old, and facing the rest of his life behind bars. Did he think about them? Did he regret his choices? Or did he still believe he'd been protecting something worth killing for? In my experience, men like Charles don't feel regret. They feel justified. They tell themselves stories about honor and family and necessary sacrifices. They never see the bodies they leave behind as human beings. Just obstacles. Problems to be solved. Tom Vance served 18 months and was released on probation. I saw him once after that at a gas station outside of town. He looked older than his 20 years, bent under the weight of what he knew and what he'd done. He saw me, too, but neither of us spoke. What was there to say? He moved to Florida, I heard. Changed his name. Started over. But you can't really start over when you've helped bury your sister. That follows you like a shadow. The retired sheriff, Marcus Donnelly, died in prison. Heart attack during his 3rd year. Some people said it was karma. Others said it was mercy. I didn't have an opinion either way. Dead is dead, and it doesn't balance the scales. His family left Ash Grove. His wife filed for divorce from her cell in women's correctional. His kids changed their last names, moved to different states, tried to outrun their father's sins. The town put up a memorial in the park, not for Caroline or Emily specifically, but for victims of domestic violence. It was a compromise, a way to acknowledge what happened without naming names. A bronze plaque and a bench where people could sit and pretend that remembering was the same as preventing. I went to the dedication ceremony. The mayor gave a speech about community healing and moving forward. A local pastor said a prayer. People laid flowers at the base of the memorial, bright colors against gray stone. But I noticed something. No one from the Vance family came. No distant relatives, no old friends of Caroline's, no one who'd known Emily beyond the headlines. It was easier to mourn strangers, easier to hold candles for victims you'd never disappointed by looking the other way. I kept working missing persons. Each case was different, but they all carried echoes of Emily's story. People who vanished because someone couldn't let them go. Families who lied to protect themselves. Secrets that festered until they killed. 6 months after Emily's case closed, I got a call from a woman in the next county. Her daughter had disappeared after threatening to expose her stepfather's abuse. The mother wanted to know if I could help. I drove out that same day, because that's what Emily taught me. That truth matters, even when it's dangerous. That some fights are worth the risk. That silence protects the guilty and buries the innocent. I found that girl alive, hidden in a motel 3 counties over. Her stepfather was arrested. Her mother pressed charges. The family shattered, but the girl survived. Not everyone gets that chance. Emily didn't. Caroline didn't. But maybe their deaths meant something if it helped me save even one person from the same fate. That's what I told myself anyway. On the hard nights, when the case files piled up and the missing faces blurred together, I'd think of Emily's voice on that recording, scared but determined. Make them show everyone what they've been hiding. So I did. I do. Every day I can. The anniversary of Emily's death came on a Saturday. I drove to the cemetery and found both graves covered in flowers. Someone had been coming regularly, keeping them tended. I never found out who. The headstones were simple granite, nothing fancy. Emily's read, "Beloved daughter and friend." She chose truth. Caroline said, "Rest now in the peace you couldn't find in life." I sat on the ground between them, feeling the dampness seep through my jeans. A year ago, Emily had been preparing for her wedding, excited and nervous and full of plans. A year ago, she didn't know that looking for truth would cost her everything. Would she have done it anyway? If she'd known how it would end, would she still have opened that basement door? I think she would have, because some people are built different. They can't live with lies, even when the truth is dangerous. They'd rather die honest than live as accomplices to someone else's crime. Emily was like that. So was her mother. And in a twisted way, that's what got them killed. Not their actions, but their nature. Their inability to pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. Their refusal to protect a man who deserved exposure, not loyalty. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery. I stood, brushed grass from my pants, placed my hand on Emily's headstone. "I hope it was worth it," I whispered. "I hope wherever you are, you know it mattered." Charles Vance's trial had revealed more than just the murders. It exposed a network of small-town corruption, favors traded, crimes overlooked, powerful men protecting each other, while vulnerable people suffered the consequences. 3 more officers from the sheriff's department resigned during the investigation. The county appointed a special prosecutor to review old cases, looking for patterns of misconduct. They found dozens. Domestic violence calls that were never followed up. Evidence that disappeared. Victims who were blamed for their own abuse. Ashgrove's perfect facade cracked, wide open, and what poured out was ugly, but necessary, because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. And for too long, the town had chosen comfort over truth. The new sheriff was a woman named Patricia Morrison, brought in from 3 counties over specifically because she had no connections to the old guard. She cleaned house, hired new deputies, implemented policies requiring body cameras and independent reviews of use of force incidents. It was slow change, painful change, but it was change. I worked with Sheriff Morrison on several cases after Emily's. She was direct, uncompromising, willing to follow evidence wherever it led, even when it was uncomfortable. The kind of law enforcement Caroline and Emily deserved but never got. They paved the way, Morrison told me once. Those women died, and this whole town had to face what it had been protecting. That's not nothing. She was right. It wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't enough. I found Caroline's diary in the evidence locker 2 years after Emily's death. The case was closed, the appeals exhausted, and technically the diary should have been returned to next of kin. But there was no one left to claim it. I signed it out, took it home, read it cover to cover in one sitting. Caroline wrote about her marriage like someone documenting her own slow drowning. The first entries were hopeful, a young bride trying to make things work. But over the years, the tone shifted. Charles became controlling, then cruel. He monitored her phone calls, her friendships, her every movement. He told her she was worthless, that no one else would want her, that she should be grateful he put up with her. She wrote about wanting to leave, but being afraid, about staying for the children, about pretending everything was fine until she didn't recognize herself anymore. The final entries were different. She'd met someone, a man who listened to her, who made her remember she was more than Charles's possession. She was planning to leave, to take Emily and Tom and start over. The last entry, dated the day she died, simply said, "Tomorrow I tell him I'm leaving. God help me, tomorrow I'm free." But tomorrow never came, because Charles couldn't accept that she belonged to herself, not to him. I closed the diary and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about all the women who never made it to tomorrow. The ones whose stories ended in basements and shallow graves, because someone loved them too hard or not enough or in the wrong way entirely. Emily's bedroom in her apartment had been cleaned out, her things distributed among friends and the few relatives who'd stayed in touch. But I kept one item, the photograph she'd planned to use in her wedding slideshow. It showed Emily and Caroline together, taken when Emily was maybe 3 years old. They were at a park, Emily on a swing with Caroline pushing her. Both were laughing, caught mid-motion, pure joy frozen in time. I had it framed and put on my desk at work, not as a reminder of the case, but as a reminder of what was lost. A mother and daughter who should have had decades together. Birthdays, graduations, Emily's wedding day with Caroline in the front row crying happy tears. Charles Vance stole all of that. He stole Caroline's future. Then 17 years later, he stole Emily's. 2 generations of women erased because one man valued his pride more than their lives. The photograph watched me work, watched me take calls from frightened spouses and worried parents. Watch me piece together the patterns of violence that ripple through families like poison in water. Sometimes people ask me why I kept it there, why I'd want a reminder of such a sad case. I told them it wasn't sad. It was true. And truth, even when it hurts, is better than comfortable lies. Emily taught me that. She died for it, but she taught me anyway. I visited Charles Vance in prison once, 3 years after his conviction. I'm not sure why. Maybe I needed to see him, to understand how someone could do what he did and live with himself after. He looked older, grayer. Prison had worn him down in ways his freedom never did. He sat across from me in the visiting room, hands folded on the table, waiting for me to speak. "Do you think about them?" I asked. "Caroline and Emily?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, every day, "Do you regret it?" "I regret getting caught." The honesty was almost refreshing. No performance. No attempt to claim he'd changed or found God or learned from his mistakes. Just the plain truth that he was sorry only for the consequences, not the crimes. Emily was going to have children, I said. She was going to be a mother. Maybe she would have had a daughter. And you could have been a grandfather. I know. And Caroline wanted to be free. That's all. Just free from you. That didn't deserve death. I never said it did. He looked at me with empty eyes. But I couldn't let her go. And I couldn't let Emily destroy everything. So I made choices. Maybe they were wrong, but they were mine to make. I stood to leave. There was nothing more to say. Charles Vance would die in that prison, and the world would be safer for it. At the door, I looked back. They're buried together now, mother and daughter. You made sure they'd never be apart again. I hope you think about that every single day. The case files sit in the cold case room now, marked solved but never really closed. Because how do you close something like this? How do you file away 2 lives cut short, a family destroyed, a town forced to confront its complicity in looking the other way? I retired from the sheriff's department 5 years after Emily's death. Not because I was tired of the work, but because I'd learned what I needed to learn. That justice is rare and imperfect. That most victims don't get their day in court. That the best we can do is bear witness, tell their stories, and try to protect whoever comes next. I teach now at the community college. Criminal justice, ethics in law enforcement, the psychology of domestic violence. Every semester, I tell my students about Caroline and Emily Vance. Not for the shock value, but for the lesson. That silence protects abusers. That family loyalty can be weaponized. That sometimes the people who are supposed to keep us safe are the ones we most need protection from. Some students cry. Some get angry. All of them leave my class understanding that crime isn't about statistics or procedures. It's about people, victims who trusted wrong, families who failed, systems that looked away until it was too late. I end every semester with Emily's recording. I play it for the class, let them hear her voice, young and scared and determined. If anything happens to me, look in the basement. Then I tell them what happened next. How she died, trying to expose her father. How her mother died, trying to escape him. How two women's need for truth and freedom cost them everything. On June 14th, every year, the day that should have been Emily's wedding, I visit her grave. I bring white roses, her favorite. Sometimes other people are there too. Jason came once, 5 years after her death. We didn't speak, just stood together and shared grief. The town has moved on mostly. New families have moved in. The old scandals fade into local legend. Stories people tell over dinner about the dark history of Ashgrove. But for those of us who were there, who saw the dress in the road and the graves in the woods, it never really fades. I think about Emily's last moments sometimes. Did she know it was her father? Did she try to reason with him? Or did she understand immediately that words wouldn't save her? Did she think of Jason, of the life they'd planned, of the children they'd never have? Or did she think of her mother, finally understanding what Caroline had faced all those years ago? The terror of being trapped by someone who claimed to love you. The desperate hope that truth might set you free, even if freedom came too late. The memorial bench in the park has weathered now, the bronze plaque green with age. People sit there eating lunch, feeding pigeons, never reading the inscription. That's fine. The memorial isn't for them. It's for the ones who remember. The ones who carry Emily and Caroline's stories like stones in their pockets. Heavy, but necessary. Because forgetting would be easier. But easy isn't the same as right. I stood in the empty chapel one last time before it was demolished. The new congregation had decided to build fresh, somewhere without ghosts. I couldn't blame them. The sanctuary was bare, pews removed, stained glass windows already sold. My footsteps echoed in the hollow space. I thought about all the weddings that had happened here, all the promises made and broken. I thought about Caroline, preparing for her wedding day, not knowing she'd never make it down the aisle. About Emily, 17 years later, repeating her mother's fate in the exact same place. Some people say everything happens for a reason. I've never believed that. There's no reason good enough for what happened to these women. No grand plan that required their deaths. Just a man's rage and pride, and a town that chose comfort over accountability. Outside, demolition crews waited to tear it all down. Soon there would be nothing left but empty ground and memories. Maybe that was better. Maybe some places are too stained to be redeemed. I walked to my car and looked back one last time. The chapel stood against gray sky, windows dark, foundation cracked. In a few days, it would be gone. Rubble and dust and nothing more. But the truth would remain. Caroline and Emily would remain in the stories we tell, the lessons we learn, the choices we make because of them. In Ashgrove, people used to say the Vance family was cursed, touched by tragedy. But it wasn't a curse. It was a man who killed the women he claimed to love. It was a sheriff who chose money over justice. It was a town that preferred silence to truth. I drove away as the first wall came down, dust rising like smoke into the afternoon air. Behind me, the chapel collapsed. Ahead, the road stretched long and empty. Some endings aren't happy. They're just true. And sometimes, truth is all the justice the dead will ever get. Some crimes end with handcuffs and verdicts. Others never truly end at all. Emily Vance and her mother didn't die because of fate or curses or bad luck. They died because truth threatened a man who believed control was love, and because too many people chose silence when speaking up felt uncomfortable. The chapel is gone now. The basement is sealed forever. But the cost of what happened there still lingers, in the lives that were cut short, in a town that learned too late that protecting appearances can be just as deadly as violence itself. Emily believed that truth mattered more than safety, that some lies are worse than death. And in the end, she paid the highest price for refusing to look away. Her story reminds us of something deeply unsettling. Evil doesn't always hide in strangers. Sometimes it lives at the dinner table. Sometimes it wears the face of family. And sometimes it survives for years, not because it's powerful, but because no one wants to confront it. Remember this case. Remember Emily, because forgetting is how these stories repeat themselves. If this story stayed with you, if it disturbed you, angered you, or made you think, then help us keep these voices from being buried again. Like this video, so more people hear the truth. Subscribe to True Crime Files Gist for carefully researched, deeply human true crime stories that refuse to look away. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because awareness saves lives and silence never does. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.